It's good to be back in brisk Tucson, and it's weird because coming here is usually really hotter than where I'm coming from, the Bay Area, and so the weather itself was something that woke me up. So what I want to have you all do is at your tables, especially for the benefit of the folks that may have not been there, go around. If you already know each other and you're already best of friends, then great. But that may not be the case for everybody at every table. So if you could take about 10 minutes introducing yourselves to the people at the table, and I'm not going to tell you how to do it. I'm just going to say make sure you give 1 or 2 minutes for each person at your table. All right, so introduce yourselves, get to know each other, and maybe spend about 5 minutes talking about the pieces from last week that you would like to follow up on. And if you can write them on Post-its, we're going to spend today doing a lot of table work, right? So because we're going to be talking about the specific interventions, I read your feedback, and I want you all to get the benefit of not only the people at your table, but then so we can cross-share out. So just, take a deep breath and say to yourself, today, I will participate. Today, I will have comments and insights and questions. And we will have a robust discussion on interventions for young people and systems managing trauma with our children. Any questions? Nope. All right, 10 minutes, table talk. If you can get the Post-its, put them in a stack, and then if Jimmy could grab them, then we can start talking about it. So any comments? Open time. Comments? Comments?
Yes, we were talking about how we need to.
I didn't know you were going to put this on me.
Yeah, that's why I'm here.
We have to get used to the taste of our foot being in our mouth. Because in working with people of different cultures, we are going to get things wrong, and we have to accept that. And then fix it and move forward.
Right. Put some vinaigrette on it or something. Put some. Okay. So metaphorically, right? Getting used to having a humble stance to this work, not meaning we're not qualified, just meaning that we're learning and we're going to make mistakes. What else? Thank you. Any other comments? Just what's on your mind? No? Okay.
We also talked a bit about cultural humility versus We talked a bit at our table about cultural humility versus cultural competence, and I think something that I believe we need to add to the dialogue within the community of our schools and our families is cultural curiosity, because I think so often we're so insulated by our own individual cultures within the home, the subcultural.
Cultural curiosity, excellent. And the beauty of being curious is you're not leading with an assumption. Well, you could be, right? But in general, by leading with curiosity, you're actually opening yourself up for new information you may not have. Really important for smart people to do that. Thanks.
I think one is that our role often is dealing with the students, and we have a lot of expertise on building relationships with all types of cultures. And yet when those students go back in the classroom with their teachers, the teachers do not have that expertise. And their focus often is, here's the data, here's your test scores, and you need to get those test scores up so it doesn't rate as high.
And that's an important issue. How many of us have challenges sometimes talking to the teachers about the stuff we're talking about, social emotional stuff? Okay, so we should definitely spend some time talking about that. Raise your hand if you have a knack for that. If you're like, I like talking to, or raise your hand if you have had a teacher that was really receptive. All right, thank you. I'm so glad that you all could at least, right, raise your hand for one teacher, because when we're thinking about the challenges and the problems we have in this addressing trauma in the schools and incidents in the classroom, it's really important when 9 out of 10 times things go wrong or things don't go the way we hoped, that we remember that one time it did, and that one time might have some information that could help us in those other 9 attempts. All right. Anyone else? Yes.
Our table would like you to talk about the culture of violence. And my question specifically was when parents tell their kids they should fight, to even if somebody uses bad words, they should fight aggressively. And they see it, it's around them in the neighborhood, it's in the media, and then it's in the family.
Okay, so that's currently one of the longest standing unresolved issues in schools. The rule is no hitting, right? Nowhere in any school I've ever been to in the United States, it's like, well, students can hit other students if. It's never if. And having worked in schools, having told children and parents 1,000 times, even if somebody's bothering or hitting you, you can't hit them back. You need to tell an adult, right? And so then as, you know, when you have your own kids, you're like telling your own child, well, if somebody hits you, then take that beating and try to get away and go find an adult. That's a tough one to crack. And so the best thinking I've ever had around this is teaching, and I'm glad you brought that up, because it also connects to how we're gonna talk about dealing with trauma, because there's all kinds of situations that no matter what I say, if you experience a certain traumatic experience where the context leading up to it was not tracked or managed or supported, when the explosion happens, there's nothing you can do in the moment. Nothing you could have did to prevent it 30 seconds before or 2 minutes before. The prevention was a day before, a week before, right? And so similarly, when I'm talking to students, my evolution of it was, well, there's consequences, right? So for the child, maybe not for a young child, let's talk high school, right? If you tell somebody, well, right, because you can have a kid who can go and provoke. We had a kid who he would constantly provoke other kids and they would beat him up. And he was the victim. He was provoking the violence, right? And so you have a lot of situations happening where kids are making choices. And we're not going to put the blame on them for that, but we also have to think about, when we're talking about safety and protecting yourself as the adults, we're here to protect them and keep them safe. And we're here to also teach them how to protect and keep themselves safe, and to what extent they have the capacity mentally, developmentally, and you know, using the high school example, to say, when you're talking to somebody, when somebody's talking crazy to you, you have a choice every step of the way leading up to someone hitting you. So I always like to focus on the antecedents. What happened 30 seconds before, 5 minutes before, an hour before, and put the focus on everything that happened before the hit going backwards. Any other comments or ideas or thoughts on that? Please, yes.
I agree with that. And, I hate this thing.
Because they can't hear. I know. I'm sorry.
So I agree with that, and I think most of us are of that perspective. But then when we are working with administration sometimes, or with other teachers, and we say, well, this is going on and this happened, and they're like, that's irrelevant. And it's very relevant, but they don't see it, and they're often very unwilling to look at the antecedent.
So that's really important as well. Yeah, go ahead.
I always think about it from like a legal perspective, and I talk to the kids frankly about it. If you assault someone, if you hit someone, it's an assault. If they hit you, it's an assault, and you never know how it's going to turn out. Whoever has the better lawyer is going to get away with it, so you could always get in trouble. So, you know, you could take your mom's advice and hit that kid, but you're going to have to deal with consequences that you might not be prepared for that are going to be really hurtful later on.
And those are real consequences. And it is unfortunate that children are, I think, overly criminalized in schools for behaviors that they would not be in trouble for out in the community, right? It's because they're in a controlled environment. So natural consequences are really good to help people because it's like the scared straight, right? That makes me more scared, but it doesn't give me the tool to change my behavior. And so natural consequences, if we talk to our young people and ask and listen and be curious and try to hear what those other natural consequences are. Oh, well, this person doesn't like me anymore. This person is picking on me, or now this, right? Try to get underneath, because when we're dealing with the adults at this level and they're like, that's irrelevant. This is from this point on, this is how we're dealing with it. That's all they see. They're not able to feel what's underneath that, which is, I felt hurt. I felt left out. I felt picked on. I felt this, I felt that. And helping them get to that and then understand, well, the natural consequence when you choose to hit somebody is they're afraid of you. And they're not going to play with you, and then they're going to gossip about you, and they're going to do this, and they're going to do that. So talking about the natural consequences as well might be another way to get them to look at themselves. Good discussion. Any other comments on that before we move on? Yes.
I'm in elementary school, so the reasoning and the logic for little kids is different, and I try to separate school from neighborhood. I don't think I can tell you not to hit somebody back in your neighborhood on your block, but in school, the rules are different, so I try to separate it in that way so that they can understand. And for the parent has given them permission, and I think that's a good thing to say to a parent. In school, this is what we do, although I know they know that, but they're angry because their kid is hurt. So, but in school, this is what we do, but you can tell them whatever you want to tell them in their neighborhood or their block. So.
Right. And so I've got a lot of Post-its, and because we want to get, yeah, you got a comment? I'll get another comment.
I think I observed it, especially from the immigrant kids. Sometimes when they are late and they report to the teacher, so maybe because of the problem of communication, but the student feels that the problem was not solved because it keeps on happening. And what they decide to do, they do legitimate defense because the things they report to the teacher, but the same things continue happening. And this sometimes bring a lot of problems because how the legitimate defense come in? Because if I report to the teacher, and there is no solution. And if tomorrow it happens again, after tomorrow happens again, what do you think that the learner will do? He will look and say, oh, I'm the only person speaking this language, or two, we are two, and these things keep on happening. And then they start to do legitimate defense. And at the end, they're going to say, no, you are not going to fight, you are supposed to report that. He has been reporting, and no solution was taken. And sometimes the teacher also will tell you, my hands are tired, what can I do? It's really confusing. Sometimes myself as a grown-up person, I'm sometimes confused myself.
Thank you. So yes, young people look at patterns, right? They pay attention to how they've been treated over time. And then they use that information to predict how they're going to be treated the next time. And kids dealing with trauma will underestimate. They will underestimate how kind and understanding the world will be, because they already overestimated it. And then they saw a pattern. So if we are listening to young people in trauma, and we're dealing with the issues, we're looking at them specifically from a lens. Now, we can talk about how immigrant students, how girls, how elementary students, we're gonna, and here's the challenge, You all have a wide spectrum of experiences, training, and knowledge on all of these topics. And you're in a wide range of different settings. So we're not gonna hit the nail on the head for every single specific situation. But we wanna at least have an understanding categorically of trauma. So trauma, the first type of trauma is complex trauma. Complex trauma is something that can happen from birth and can impact a child's life in a myriad of ways because of environmental factors, home life factors, family supports, etc. And when those supports are challenged, so what is he talking about? If a child is separated from their parents in a foreign country and their parents are sent back, right, there's thousands of children that will have complex trauma from here on out. And that complex trauma does certain things to the brain. The second type of trauma is episodic, right? And it's called PTSD. We talked about it last week. And so the complex versus simple trauma, the simple trauma is what we're most used to dealing with. Oh, this kid's mother was attacked, right? That's a traumatic experience for the whole household. They come to school, they're sad, they're quiet, and what's wrong? And they don't, and that's another thing, right? When kids experience trauma in the home, that's usually home business, and you don't talk about home business at school, right? So you have this, and we just talked about how do we deal with parents, some of us are those parents, telling our kids to hit back, right? So there's this side of the house and there's that side of the house. And so the way these two types of trauma impact young people has to be understood categorically and not just as a blanket thing of trauma, right? And so specifically, what is happening with trauma, not getting all the way into the biology of it, but what's happening with trauma is you have the inability to cope with a situation, right? You normally had the resources to cope with day-to-day situations, and when they have the inability to cope with those situations and they're experiencing what we would call trauma, then they're going to experience those symptoms, and that trauma is going to skew their perception. It's not that they don't know what's going on, but it's going to skew their perception in a way that has a heightened level of threat. So somebody says, hey, what are you doing? They're perceiving that as a threat rather as a question. Because again, with patterns, when you're traumatized and you start seeing patterns, oh, this adult is asking me, what am I doing? That means I'm about to get suspended. That means I'm about to get in trouble. That means somebody's gonna call my mom. That means, right? And then the other part where, like I said last week, 90% of what happens between students doesn't get to the awareness of the adults. And so they could also be thinking like, uh-oh, what am I in trouble for, right? Because think, if it's an unpredictable environment for a young person, not saying it actually is, if that's what they're thinking, then how do we deal with that? So, teachers, we're talking to teachers, we're trying to explain trauma to teachers. How do we do that? Can anybody talk to how they generally connect with teachers? So as we're talking about trauma, I want to go through categorically the domains in which all of you share experiences. So talking with parents, talking with teachers, and then doing interventions with the students, and then doing how do we work as counselors and as a support team when you have 10 kids, we got all these interventions Dr. Payne just talked about, but I got 5 minutes to do all of this with 4 kids, and they're still coming in the door. So we're gonna try to go through that. So let's start with teachers. What is the primary, how frequently do you talk to the teachers? And when you talk to the teachers, what are you talking to them about?
It has worked the best for me when I've been able to do a PD of professional development and talk about the changes in the brain, talk about the surprise noises, the loud voices, the lack of a schedule that's predictable, to talk about the things that might trigger a kid. And if I can do it as a training, it works better than one-on-one trying to say what they're doing wrong.
I see. So one-on-one is more difficult. Is that a common thing? It's better to talk to them in groups or be brought into a PD? No? No? Okay, so varies. All right. We'll get one comment then over there.
You know, after our last training with you, I had PD this week, was my responsibility. It was about PBIS and restorative practices and, you know, some behaviors. And our big thing is cell phones. And it's causing a lot of teacher conflict with the teenagers out of high school, and I'm sure at many other levels too. And I realized it's exactly what you said. The teachers were wanting us to come in, and they wanted to see the student get in trouble. They wanted to see the student get pulled out of class. They keep saying, you guys have no teeth, you guys aren't doing anything, you're not backing us up. So I really took the stance of, let's think about why these teenagers have this fixation on their phone. Let's look at what addiction is in the brain. Let's look at the dopamine that's coming. Let's think about this more from, let's talk to kids about, why is your phone controlling you this way? What are the negative aspects that the phone is bringing to your life? Education, social, relationships. And let's have a more holistic conversation, but they really kept going back to the fact that when I call, you guys don't come, and when you come, it's too nice. And it was exactly what you said. They want to see that, like, punishment. And so we're really trying to not excuse behavior, but explain behavior. Like, this is why they're doing this.
Not excuse behavior, explain behavior. Teachers expect you to be mean. I'm right. Technology, right? Stop. You know, you say stop, but they say snooze. Okay, sorry, you had a comment.
Yes, when I try whenever possible to let the teachers know everything I can. I talk to the kids and say, can I tell the teacher this? Can I talk to your teacher about what's going on? And if they agree, I will tell the teacher everything. I mean, I will go have a conference with that teacher and talk to them. I really believe in keeping the teachers as informed as possible. And I don't know about you guys, but most of my teachers, I mean, 90% of them are awesome. And they really do care. Most people don't go into teaching unless they really, really love kids. I mean, we don't get paid anything, so I really think that, you know, they're there because they do want to know what's going on with the kids. If you take the time to really sit down with them and say, you know, this kid is going through this is what they're going through. And then the teacher will say, well, how can I help? What can I do? And we talk, we kind of brainstorm it together and how we can work out that problem with the kid. I know teachers get frustrated, but they really basically do love the kids they're working with, in my experience. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, and when I'm hearing teachers feel like that, it is an upset. And so here's a quick intervention. Who's next? Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that, but I think that it's a day-to-day process. You know, you're always building those relationships. I don't think I share all the information with everyone all of the time. But I think when you were asking about how do you help a student, you know, or a teacher know about a child who's in need at the moment, I think you just have to sometimes go directly to the teacher and just say something briefly about this child's having a difficult time today. I just want you to kind of be aware of that and see where it goes from there. And you have to read the teachers, because even though we have lovely, wonderful, beautiful, caring teachers, we do have teachers who are sometimes wanting to get the child in trouble, or they have an agenda, and it's reflected in how they respond to children. So I think it's a case-by-case kind of situation. situation. And I do feel cautious about how much information do you share, because people are already always talking too much about children. And we need to have that awareness is, you know, this is my child. How much do I want people sharing their difficult stories? So it's complicated.
So here's a invitation, and we'll get the next comment. What's happening is the child is traumatized, therefore they show up to school and the teacher has to deal with it, and then they take on that trauma. And now you have a traumatized adult and traumatized child. And that's what we're dealing with. So, and we're not beating up on teachers, and everything we say, it's some teachers, sometimes some, right, students, is to invite their humanity. So, what's your name?
Luz.
So you're an angry teacher. Hi, Luz, how are you? Good to meet you. So tell me what's going on, right? Just right there. Acknowledge that it's two people talking to each other. Because when you jump right in like, hey, what's going on, right? You skip a very important perfunctory piece, which is a connection, right? So it's what we would do with kids. It's what we would say, how you treat a little child. You say, hey, sweetie, how are you doing? How's everything, right? So why wouldn't we do that with adults? Because when you're traumatized to where you're mad at other adults, that's your 5, 6, 7-year-old inside. So just that invitation, and then, hey, you're the teacher, you're the expert, what's going on? And then the challenge is to guide and direct their response of what's going on. Okay, so when they start talking about behaviors, then, oh, okay, so what was going on in the class? So, okay, so does the student have, right? And guiding, leading questions so that you're not just, hey, lay out what's wrong and then start talking about why everybody else is doing it wrong. So, right, that's the invitation. Okay, who's next?
Oh, I was going to ask about, like, I think one of the problems is, like, our system is the goals of our system, because the educators, teacher system, as far as being in the classroom, is I have a goal of, I have this information I got to present, I need to get this out there, I got this test coming up, I got this assessment to do. That's my goal. Whereas our goal, or our function, is more along the lines of, how do I support this kid in this environment to help them function there? So one of the issues we have is, we have a system that tells teachers, your goal is not to so much invest in that kid's humanity, because we have to get you here. We have to get that kid here. So the teacher is focused on that goal, which is good or bad. It's not benefiting what's going on. That's mine.
And so these are complex interventions. That's why it's so hard to just give interventions, because they're so contextual and they're not blanket, right? So the humanity piece is just the greeting. That's just the greeting. That's just the acknowledgement that you're two adults about to work on a challenge. The second part is the reframe, right? We use language and we get real fancy. What's your lens, right? And understanding what your lens is, and then making sure you hear what the teacher's lens is on the issue is really important, and then stating it out loud, right? Saying, okay, so you're feeling unsupported, right? It's the same counseling principles that you do with children, and here's just like a teacher will say, well, I'm not a social worker. A counselor might say, well, I'm not these teachers' therapists. True, but you got to use what you got, right? To really get to what you know is going to work best for children. Yes?
I think it's important that we, as support staff, I worked in the African American Student Service Department, and as a support staff, I work with African American kids specifically. But one of the goals I try to let the teacher know is that let it work for you. And a lot of times I had one kid that struggled in the class, and I'll make it real quick. And he would go from 0 to 100 right away. I knew the relationship. We had a real good relationship. The teachers didn't. So I sent out an email to all the teachers to let them know that this kid can go 0 to 100 real fast. Give him his moment to step back. teachers that are open to that were successful. Those that did not, they kept fighting the battle. So I think it's just building that relationship with those kids, especially those that are in our roles, building that relationship with those kids and being able to communicate that to our teachers in a way where they are not working, it's not working against them.
I had a boss that said, and it was the most succinct phrase, she was like, drop the rope. Drop the rope. I was like, wow, isn't that a great metaphor? Drop the rope, right? In terms of once you get into a struggle with a student or with a teacher, oh man, that, you know, that's energy return back and forth. What happens when you drop the rope? What happens when we say, And so one intervention that I never forget, a teacher, it was like, he was like, wow, really, PE teacher. So, you know, the issues with PE, right? Wants to dress, or walk, you gotta run, you gotta exercise, you got all these issues. And I was doing one of these trainings, he was sitting in the back like, this dude, is he really serious? And so at the break, he talked to me outside, and I gave him one quick intervention, because he was like, what, I mean, do you really think this stuff works? And so I gave him one intervention. I said, well, the cell phones. We said, cell phones are a problem. Hats are a problem. Certain stuff, right? And that's another thing. When we're just focused on the stuff, what are we not focused on, right? We're not focused on everything else. But it was a simple invitation to say, when you have to do a compliance thing, I got to do it. If my principal comes in, I'm going to be in trouble. You need to put that iPad away, instead of saying, hey, you got iPad out, I'm taking that, give it to me, boom, right? The other alternative is say, hey, you know you're not supposed to have the iPad out. Could you put it away in your bag, or you could give it to me, I'll put it in my desk and I'll give it to you at the end of the class. And walk away. Walk away, right? Because what we'll do, you know, and so I told this teacher that, and his principal told me months later, he said, man, what did you say to so-and-so? Because it transformed his practice. And what it did was it allowed him, because what was happening for him before that was he was constantly fighting. He was constantly in tug of war with the students. And then when they would get in trouble, he was fighting and in a tug of war with the parents, because the kids was like, I didn't do anything. And they just told me, and then it's a back and forth, right? Whereas now the teacher's calling the parents saying, so-and-so did this. I gave him an option. They chose, yeah, because then if I come back, I'm like, oh, okay, so you're going to put it away or you're going to give it to me, right? Because she's saving face in front of me. And then so when I come back, I check, and then she has an opportunity to say, okay, I'll put it in my bag. Or if we still have a problem, we still have a problem. And I got to take the iPad. And it's still a problem. So it doesn't eliminate the problem or prevent the problem. It gives us more options. And that's what we need, are more options in that moment, specifically for those interventions. Who's next?
So I just wanted to go back to what you were talking about, how kids are conditioned to behave in certain ways, conditioned by trauma, conditioned by sights and sounds and things like that. And I think the same thing is true for adults when they haven't dealt with their trauma or their issues, whether they were truly traumatic or not. And so in the same way that I believe that parents don't go into parenting to hurt their kids, to mess their kids up, I think the same thing is true with teachers, and teachers do often get a rap for kind of being very reactive, and the intervention you just talked about with this PE teacher, I think goes to helping teachers and all adults and kids make the connection between conditioning and insight. And that's where we really need to go. Where does it come from? Where are the opportunities and where are the roadblocks?
And so that comment was really, you know, it reminds me about the importance of understanding each other's perspective, right? I have to understand your perspective as a counselor. As a counselor, you have to understand the teacher's perspective, what they're dealing with. Teachers really, yeah, because parents feel like, well, y'all don't really understand what I'm going through, right? Everybody, and the kids, right? So everybody in this system, from the students, to the parents, to the extended family, to the teacher, to the counselor, to the administrators, when it's just us administrators, when it's just us counselors, when it's just us teachers, when it's just us parents, Everybody else doesn't understand our perspective. And we have to respect that we're not going to fully understand the parent's perspective, right? But that is at the crux or the heart of the ongoing misunderstanding and lack of cooperation between the groups. So what do we do with that if we're a counselor? Yes?
Well, I think that the main thing is just not to get into conflict. For me, what's worked, I mean, I've been a counselor for 14 years, and what's worked for me with parents, with teachers, is always be there for them. Like, at any time I stop and I'll talk about their problems or try to help them with their problems and build that relationship with them throughout the years that I've been at BC. Like, most of the teachers now know they can come if they're sad or upset and talk to me. But also just, I've had teachers attack me, I mean, verbally or whatever, just, and I just don't respond to that. I think you can't let your passions and things get in the way of relationships between parents or teachers. You just have to stay calm in every moment, and once you start building those relationships, you can talk to them. I mean, it's like you said about the bomb, you have to deal with it way before. You have to build those relationships and those things through time in order to be able to be effective speaking to them about a student or anything else when you get there.
Mm-hmm. So categorically, if you're talking to a teacher in general to talk about trauma, what are some other ways we could talk about trauma? Because, am I hearing this correctly? Help me out. Those of you, how many of you have success talking to teachers about trauma and are able to, and they're able to understand it and they get it? Excellent. So for those folks, do you go the extra mile, or could you go, what if you, and do you go the extra mile to say, and this trauma then impacts us, right? Because then you get them, right? Because then there's an understanding and there's an empathy, right? That what we're talking about these students and families and what's going on in their communities is also being experienced by me, the teacher, right? And it's tricky acknowledging this stuff and not like getting into a pity party, or then the automatic reflex is to pivot and blame, oh yeah, it's the administrator's fault, or oh, it's right. And that never gets us anywhere, right? The only thing that gets us anywhere is reaching out and connecting. And so many times I was a social work professor for 6 years, and so that was a big challenge, especially for young social workers who don't necessarily have children of their own, are new in the profession, and they're going in trying to talk to these teachers, and yet they have this wealth of knowledge that the teachers lack or that they're not necessarily focused on. And so the way I have always tried to support social workers in talking with teachers is taking the inquisitive stance in explaining trauma, continually asking them for examples of that. So that what you're doing is you're bridging the professional gap. There's a professional gap between teachers and counselors. Some teachers might feel, hey, you don't appreciate what I got to deal with, right? And therefore, I'm going to listen to you with 30% of, my open mind is going to have a screen door on it, right? It's good. I'm not going to fully listen because I don't think you fully appreciate what I'm going through. That may be what they're thinking. And how would you know if they're thinking that? Well, they're not really taking in what you're saying. And so acknowledging that, not, and taking the one down, it's a term by saying, hey, I know you're a teacher, you're dealing with this a lot more than me, and my role is blah, blah, blah. But if you could tell me some ways we could address trauma, and it's really a conversation, and this is the contextual piece categorically. But if you're dealing with a teacher specifically for a child, then as a counselor, your central role, you have a lot of tools at your disposal when you're talking to the teacher. If you have context, how often do you actually know the child now that you're showing up, right? Or how often is it brand new? So if it's brand new, to you, this young person and their family and their situation is brand new, then obviously you're gonna do your research. But let's use an example where you know the kid, you know the teacher, this is not the first rodeo. Then in those situations, you have the opportunity to be that interdisciplinary lens and say, okay, well, let's talk about the parents. Not talk about them, but let's acknowledge them and their role, and they're going to need to know about this at a certain level. Let's acknowledge you, the teacher. Let's acknowledge the student. And let's talk about this in a way where we're going around and around in circles around how we can recognize how the parents are trying to support the child, how we can recognize how the child is dealing with, my mom says this, my teacher says that, and my counselor's really nice, and right? And so really being the ones to, as the counselor, like you said, not taking it personal when the teacher's yelling at you, because you're coming into it knowing what your role is and knowing how your role is different from theirs. So you come bringing your lens, bringing your tools, saying what you offer. How many of you do that already? You come and you say, I'm the counselor, and the things that I'm able to do to support students when they have fights, when they get sent out of class, when they have big issues, is I try to connect with what's going on for the child in order to move them from point A to point B in terms of their behaviors, right? And then focusing in on behaviors. A behavior conversation is very concrete. And it's a very important conversation. And even when we're talking about behaviors, when the teacher's describing what happened, to rephrase and paraphrase with more with non-judgmental language, right? So I did a program where we had EPSDT mental health funding, which basically meant it was insurance that allowed us to provide mental health to children. But the billing mechanism was the behavior notes, BIRT, behavior, intervention, response, plan, BIRP. And so you had to write your behavioral notes. We got to write minute-to-minute notes. So if I do a 15-minute intervention with a young person, I got to turn around and go write out exactly what happened. This helped us understand how we judge what we believe we saw. So clinician comes in and writes up an intervention. I walked in, the student was angry at the other student. Wait, angry? What? That's not descriptive. Angry how? I can't picture it. So you have to rewrite it and say, the student had clenched teeth, their fists were balled, and they got up and started walking hunched over angrily, or I threw it in again, right? Started walking over to, so that's a different description. So when you use that principle of language, let's be specific about the behaviors, that's how you can back off of some of the judgment. And that's also how you can identify how the teacher is seeing the situation. Does that make sense? And so it's also how we can back off of the judgment for the student's behavior. And it's a more realistic conversation that because think about it this way, if you're talking to the teacher as if the child and the parent is in the room with you, how are you going to talk? Right? If you're talking to the teacher as if the child and the parent is in the room and it's a legal proceeding, oh, we're going to be really careful with our words, aren't we? We're not going to say, look, I'm tired of this. He's always, we're not just going to, let it all hang out and just, right, go in, right? We're going to say, well, I came into my classroom, right? They're going to be very measured. And we want to do that. That's what professionals do. And that's how we can discipline the conversations so that it's not a therapy session or a venting session for the teacher, because now you've built a rapport, right? It's difficult. You got to catch all of these pieces. You go in saying, well, I'm a good rapport builder, right? Hey, how's it going? Oh, how's this, that, right? Asking them about, their weekend and this and that. Those are excellent strategies, but you got to balance it, right? And so, I'm sorry, hands? Okay, so I want to go through a list of interventions. Now, you all have had, oh, what's that?
I just wanted to respond to something you had said earlier. You know how the teacher has her own perceptions of what had happened in the classroom? I'm always very mindful that they see a different side of the child than I see, because when I'm one-on-one with a student in the office, they're so different than how they behave in the classroom. You know, because I'm sitting there and I'm listening to them, and all my attention is on them. And a lot of times, even these angry kids, that's what they need. They need somebody who's going to sit and listen to them. And so I see this really nice side of kids that the teachers describe a totally different child. And I recognize that they're seeing a different child in action than when I interact with and talk to teachers. And I want to be mindful that the dynamics in the classroom play a whole different role than the quietness of my office.
Right.
So I don't want to discredit ever what the teacher is experiencing or seeing, because I know that it's hard and it's different and it's difficult sometimes.
And so, and that's important, because we really, really, really do understand. And what we'll do is we'll take a quick break, but then I want to switch and then talk about some of the interventions with how we talk to families. And we'll go through how we're talking to them, how we're initially inviting them, and then talk about some more categorical interventions like restorative justice and collaborative problem solving. I think you guys are going to like that. All right, 5-minute break. I was just talking, someone was talking to me at the break about immigrant students and coming from war-torn or, I mean, really difficult situations, and recognizing, you know, at Tucson, there's challenges in the community. There's different communities that have a lot of issues, and there's not exactly bombs dropping or anything like that. So what could be, and this is a quick intervention, again, intervention, I'm hearing the concern. I was like, well, let me just throw out to the group. Similar to Jimmy talking about training and how do we cross-train. One idea, and I'm open to other ideas, we could workshop this in 3 minutes. How to support teachers and other staffs having more compassion and understanding what these young people are going through, particularly if they're being seen as troublemakers or violent or dangerous, and they just simply don't feel safe because they've only been here for a week or a month or a year, right? And the off the top idea I thought was, well, show a documentary, show a film, show something where the teachers get to see and you have a discussion, you have maybe a day like this or something in a PD after school for the teachers, just to say, hey, we've got all year. So month to month, we focus on the most, the populations that are impacted the most, right? So February could be, you know, understanding the world in TUSD, right? Give it a really nice fancy title. And you bring in somebody to talk about what's going on in some of these countries. And someone else said the intervention, when the intervention is more successful for some of us when we address a whole group instead of an individual teacher, that is something proactively that can help. And I'm certain teachers would appreciate it. You just haven't had a chance to focus on it, right? It's like, okay, you have some new students. Okay, all right, they're from here. And I'm just thinking about my lesson plan and not, oh, what are the considerations for this? What country are you from, right? So that's just an idea. Any other ideas around this issue of staff, we're not just going to say teachers, staff not understanding the unique needs and challenges of immigrant students that are coming from unstable countries?
Well, to me, I also go to the International Play Therapy Conferences where there's been a lot on trauma. I worked in an agency where it was all trauma. To me, what is the most important is the research on the brain. There are brain changes. And for people to realize that yes, the brain can heal from trauma, but it's a process, and it takes a lot of years, a lot of patience, a lot of targeted interventions, and it's, you know, once you know that it's a physical change in the brain, how can you be critical? How can you not have compassion?
And awareness is really important. That's why, you know, we're brainstorming these ideas. They're not getting a specific tool. They're just getting awareness. It's not enough, right? Because I still have awareness. I have more compassion for the behavior, but I don't have the tool to deal with it because I still got to deal with it. And so any other ideas for how we can support? Oh, go ahead.
I think also looking at there's a one approach that works for everyone, so having that conversation individually with teachers about what helps them the most with those certain students and how you can work with them, what information they need so that they can have a productive time in the classroom.
Yes, and the best idea I've ever had in working with schools was to go into a school and find an adult that's already in the building that already does that, that already knows how to do that, and then helping the whole school become aware of that strategy as a strategy that's already worked in the environment they're working in, right? And so the teacher may or may not want me to put them out there like that, but sharing those strategies even when they have the capacity to do individual diagnosis of the situation. Really, really important. So thank you all for that quick, yes, another comment?
One of the things that I've shared with the teachers, we try to proactively approach as far as just a simple question, how can I help you? Because they will enter into the school and you can see they've had a situation at home, or a lot of times just reading them and trying to see by the body language that they're bringing into the school. Okay, so this is a problematic, you know, morning or whatever. And just a simple question of how can I help you? And then a lot of times just really listening, and they can give us ideas. You know, could we just go for a walk? Just a brisk little walk before you enter the classroom. We have one student that she just likes to kind of bury her head in reading a book. Well, would it help if you read for about 5 or 10 minutes and then you join in the class? That sort of thing. Little things that maybe they just need a little downtime before they can start their day.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So flexibility is really great for the body, and it's really great for emotions. And so being flexible in our interventions is going to keep recurring as a theme. Somewhere along the way, we were all told that if we've identified a violation of a rule, we need to address it right there and resolve it to the end immediately. And of course, that's not realistic, right? There's a lot of deferring. And so sometimes we can use flexibility to, my favorite types of interventions when I was at the alternative school, when kids would blow out and you come into the hallway, there's a kid sitting in front of the office, and it's like, well, what's going on? Go for a quick walk. Say, hey, man, I'm putting some boxes together. Can you come with me? Come help, right? Distraction is a wonderful tool. Distracting the young person, distracting the teacher, because you're not tricking them. You need to shift from your emotion to see the situation differently. That's what reflection is, looking at something from another angle. And so if you come into my classroom and I'm the activated teacher and you say, hey, what's going on? What's up? How can I help? Da-da. If that doesn't work and I'm still activated, distract me. Distract me. By asking a question offhand. Hey, you know what? I wanted to ask, you're a math teacher, so I was curious about when students, right, and it can be relevant to the work. Don't just start talking about, basketball, but you can distract them about a different topic in the classroom, about a different issue. Say, okay, well, there's some things we got to deal with this situation, but what about this other student? Or just switching gears, because then you're allowing that teacher to inadvertently drop the rope on that situation. For that moment, the results are stunning. It's amazing, right? It happens to us. You get distracted. You forget what the hell you're going to say, do, whatever, right? We get distracted all the time. Or maybe it's just me. So those are really good strategies. And I know that the teachers you deal with them the most, right? As far as the adults. Let's talk about families, right? So what are some successful ways? I'm not going to list out all the obvious things, right? So what are the obvious ways we engage and work with families toward the common goal? And if I had technology, I would have two big circles, right? You've heard of, actually, I think I could draw them over here. And the two concentric circles are the interest of you, the adult, and the interest of the family, right? So we have the family, and then we have us. Okay? So there's a world of issues that the family is concerned about. And everything that happens in the school, everything that happens with their child related to the school is a percent. It's not the whole thing. We know it's an important part, but it's not the whole thing. There are things that we're talking about that are wholly in this circle. And then there's things that the school is focused on that a lot of it, there's a certain percent of things that the schools and the adults are doing and focused on that do not support or touch or necessarily focus on the families. So when we're trying to find interest convergence, right, we're on the same page, so to speak. This is what we're trying to do. We're trying to acknowledge to the family, hey, the example, right? You are coming to school every day late. That's a need of your family, but here's how it's impacting your child's participation in school. Third space. This is also an intervention. Taking out a piece of paper, putting it on the table, and saying, because what that does is that also gets me off the hook. So I'm the angry teacher. So now you're not talking about me and how good I am or how not good I am, or I'm the parent. You're not talking about how I'm a good parent or a bad parent. We're talking about this piece of paper. I'm telling you, psychologically, that is a thing. It is a thing. When somebody's in trouble and you say, what did you do? And then, or why? Why did you do that? Ooh, there's no quicker way to get full-on defense. Full-on Klay Thompson defense. And what's a different way, right? A different way is to say, hey, so what happened, right? So I heard, right? And it's not, you're not saying you, you're not blaming them. You're just talking about the content, because there's three elements to a difficult conversation. Element number one is the feelings conversation. The feelings conversation is what we often feel like are facts, but they're not facts. They're feelings. And those feelings are whether we feel good about a situation or bad about a situation, right? It's very simple. If we feel good about a situation, it is a good situation. If we feel bad, I know it's so simplistic, but it's not a real thing. It's our judgment. We've made it up. We've completely made it up. And so that's always at play in difficult conversations, because you're talking about something that is implicating a problem. So the second element are the actual facts. We talked about BERT, behavior intervention, response plan, being very, very careful, specific, and measured and descriptive with our language as much as possible. That's the second aspect of a difficult conversation. The third aspect of a difficult conversation is meaning. What does this mean? Does this now mean I'm a bad teacher? Does this now mean I don't deserve to keep my job? Does this now mean, right? And that's what everyone deals with when they have a difficult conversation. Those 3 elements, this is how I feel about it, these are the facts, and this is how I feel about it, right? And so that's you, the counselor, or that's them, the teacher, and that's also the administrator. The administrator's having those 3 things go on as well. Am I good? Right? How beleaguered they feel. Okay, so when we're having difficult conversations, we got to use every tool we have to lower the stakes in order to get to an agreement or clarity. Because if you have those 3 elements in a difficult conversation and I have those 3 elements, we're not going to get anywhere if we're both not trained and we're both not clear on how to get to the goal. Because then it's just a tug of war. So having difficult conversations, again, engaging families, we want to recognize that they have a whole world of stuff that doesn't have to deal with us. So the example I gave in terms of engaging families that are difficult to engage, how many of you have hard time reaching some parents or getting some parents to come into the school or getting some parents to follow up and show up for the meeting and on and on and on and on and on? Okay, I got you. Okay, so what my go-to intervention with social workers when I would talk about that, and it's frustrating when you're getting started and you're trying, because we waited, I scheduled, I said, no, I'm meeting with this parent, right, and it's frustrating. At some point, you're gonna reach them on the phone. At some point, you're gonna talk to them, and what's gonna happen? They're gonna say, oh, I'm sorry, I missed the appointment, blah, blah, blah. You don't even know what they say after that because you shut off the listening because you're waiting for them to stop talking to say, so how about tomorrow? Or how about, right, to get them to reschedule. Now, the magic is when parents mess up, right, in terms of making an agreement with the institution, it's a big deal making an agreement with an institution. That's what they're doing, right? So even though they blew off your meeting, they feel a little bit bad. So they're going to come up with an excuse. When they roll out that excuse, you listen. Because they're giving you critical information about their family a lot of times. They might just say, oh, I overslept, but who's that honest, right? They might say, oh, I had to go downtown, I had to run errands. What are the excuses? Anybody? What are the excuses for missing a meeting from families?
Car broke down.
Car broke down? Sick child? Forgot, relatives, anything related to the car, the house, relatives, that's golden information that they just gave you. And you jot it down, and you remember it, and you put it in a file, and just offhand, the next time you talk to them, oh, I know you had your aunt, the child's, so-and-so's aunt was sick, how are they doing? How are they doing? Are they cool, right? And so when parents give you information, and it could have been a lie, right? So that's even more points for us because now they feel bad. And we're not trying to make them feel guilty. We want them to be honest, and we want to assume that they're being honest. We're just recognizing reality here. But that is the way we can inadvertently bring the parents into the fold. Any other ideas? I know we have some effective strategies in the room with parents. So talk, this is your chance to shine. I did this.
So I work with high school students, and sometimes when I'm not able to get hold of parents or they don't show up for meetings several times, I just go and do a home visit. That's an effective way of getting hold of the parents, to show up and say, hey, what's going on? We had a meeting. We got a couple of times. How can I help? And parents will open up to you and tell you what's really going on.
Home visits.
We have valet pickup at dismissal, and so those parents that don't come in, the cars drive by, and I'm one of the people that yells out, Jose and Julian, well, that's the mom that we haven't had a chance to talk to. There they are, and you can just poke your head in the car window and have a very quick conversation. But you can also use it to build relationships on a daily basis. And I'll say, oh, your son did blah, blah, blah. He was a great peer mediator today. And so it's not always a, oh, she's gonna talk to me thing.
So 2 excellent strategies with the home visits. Very much so gives you an opportunity to shift the balance of power. Just want to make this quick reference. We're going to keep getting comments. But when we talked about last week cultural humility, recognizing and challenging the imbalance of power, why the hell would I go to their house? Why would I go into their community? I'm working at the school. I'm trying to get their kid at the school. Well, if you can, if that's not illegal, if you feel safe and comfortable, especially with those most difficult to reach families, because then you're going into the home and and the balance of power shifted, and you can support that. So when they offer you some water, you say yes. You say thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm so thirsty. Shifting the imbalance of power. If you can't drink their water, why the hell would they trust us? Right, go ahead.
I was going to say that we have a food pantry at home, and so I make sure that with some of my students, I send home bags of food, and then when I'm talking to the parent, I'll refer to that, and it just always builds goodwill, as a way of connecting with families, and sometimes it's very strategic, but it does make a connection, and it's all about that.
You'll also find parents who won't show up for IEP meetings or won't answer the door when you go to the home, but they'll come to sports events. So try to catch them where you can. So they come to the basketball, soccer, or football game or whatever. You don't want to discuss private matters there. You do want to make those connections and let them know that, hey, missed you today or whatever, and just put it together. So, I think that's a good strategy in order to stand with those parents.
Excellent strategies, catching them, dropping the kids off, picking them up, sporting events. Everybody comes to the promotion, right? And also, how many of you find ways to have peer-to-peer, parent-to-parent support? Do we have any instances of that? One example would be a connection because when you have kids that are connected and friendly or in conflict, then you have parents that are connected, whether they communicate or not. And so maybe not initially with a conflict situation, but in a situation where 2 kids are cooperating and doing a great job, right? When I get a call about my kid and it's about a problem with another student, then I'm thinking about this parent potentially is adversarial. But when I hear about, and so because that's his friend, he really plays with this kid a lot, and it's like, well, I kind of need to know their parents, right? It gives us a whole different frame in terms of, well, this is the experience of my child, so therefore it's going to be consistent with the adult. So the calling them when they're catching them doing good, making that initial contact, and let me also switch back to one of the post-its and said, how do we address our bias when we're doing these interventions? Here's the best thing about bias. When you are able to pinpoint your bias, that's when you go in. That's when you go in. Oh, I think this parent won't be receptive to me. Okay, let me try to engage them, right? Because that's how you overcome your bias. Otherwise, you'll make up an excuse for why you're not engaging them. Oh, well, they don't respond. Or they're, right? And it's because we didn't want to follow up as adults, as paid adults. We've all done it. But because we haven't seen it done necessarily, and we haven't seen it done and seen it done successfully. The thing with all of these interventions is there is no silver bullet. I don't have a magic wand or pixie dust. And so there is no magic, but, and when we're talking about these interventions, the best interventions are over time, right, in general, than episodic. So talking about intervention after intervention after intervention after intervention. We walk around with all of these, like a custodian or a mechanic. We got all of these tools, and it can weigh us down sometimes. And sometimes we have to go back and say, I need a universal tool. I need one of those gadgets. You see them on TV for $15.99, and you get this and this and this, and it's got 15 different tools in one little thing. You kind of need that. You kind of need, as you gain experience, the ability to be more efficient with your interventions. More comments on families, working with families. And so besides the hitting values conversation with families, that's also an important way to check your bias. Is if you assume, well, they don't value education because they bring their child late to school a half hour every day, right? And you ask the parent, well, what's going on with the situation? From our standpoint, here's how it, over a long term disadvantages your child. Are there other ways we could address that? And hearing, then listen to the parent to see what their value is around that. And you might hear something interesting. You might hear, well, it is what it is, I don't care, right? And that's never the value. You always gotta dig deeper. That's kind of a defensive response. But eventually when you get to their value, you might find out that they feel guilty. But that's the best that they can do, right? And then you have to move forward from that information on, okay, well, are there other ways? There's always other solutions. There's always creative ways of doing it, but a lot of times we don't have the time to really delve and get underneath. Yes?
I just had a quick thought when you were talking about family to family, because we have a community rep who does a lot of events, and one of them that's very successful is Luncheon with Loved Ones, and our PTO does movie nights. But there is a bias that I've heard, probably even had that in my head of, oh, they'll show up for that, but not for academics. So it's almost like teachers might get upset about it. Oh, great, they came to movie night and they blew me off for my parent-teacher conference.
So, talking to teachers, excellent. Talking to teachers, making those connections. As counselors, you have the lens where you're able to see those dynamics and make those connections. So when you're talking to a teacher in the classroom about a problematic student and saying, oh yeah, well, we've been trying to talk to the parent and maybe set up a meeting, but the family movie night is coming up in a couple of weeks, and a lot of parents come to that and flipping it, right? On the front end, saying when there's a problem, okay, not so much how do we drag the parents in for this episode, but how do we have this conversation about, hey, parents are already engaged in the school. Parents are already mingling with other parents. How do we address this issue by starting with that community event? Because that's the goal in the first daggone place, right? Is to build community with the families and the students and the teachers. Because what's built is trust. Parents are just like us, just like anybody else, right? When you have an agenda, when people are asking you to go here and go there, you have to prioritize. You have to say, okay, first, make sure I got to go to work, make sure I got to pick up my kid, make sure, right? Every parent has to prioritize. And so coming into the school for stuff, they may not be able, right? There are actual legitimate barriers to parents coming into the school all the time. There's actual legitimate difficulty with blaming the parents for the children's behavior. And we're going to get into that more with collaborative problem solving. I do have the technology for that, for us to look at when we talk about collaborative problem solving. So we'll finish up talking about how to engage families and then go into collaborative problem solving. So you've got the sporting events, just recap, right? We've got lots of different ways to engage parents automatically, right? You have a lot of supports. You guys have trainings, you have all of these things. Are there ways to also offer trainings where you're offering food and you're offering these things at the movie night and you have a commercial? Do they do this? Do they do this? Do they at the beginning give a bunch of announcements or try to use that opportunity to engage the families just on a little bit of business side? Is that? Well, it's an option. It's an option. Or giving them materials or whatever, because they're coming for the movie, they're coming for the game, they're coming for the popcorn and free food and this and that. And then also, I get it too, with my 11-year-old, is when you're trying to bring the parents in for these creative community engagements, right? You get the kids. The kids do the recruitment. Dad, you need to sign this. I need you to sign this because they're gonna have a fair, or Dad, they're gonna have the fairs on Thursday after school. I need $5 because they're gonna have popcorn and pickles and right. So use the kids, right, to get their parents in. And these are the low-hanging fruit because you're building relationship with the kid and their parent, right? And we all know there's stuff we gotta do that we're not necessarily ready for, or isn't going to be a good experience, and so it's always nice. And I want to address the underlying issue that was also mentioned a couple times of ultimately there's resentment from some teachers when they see families being engaged positively, students being engaged positively, and the only time there's negativity they feel, some teachers feel sometimes, is in their classroom because they don't have the support, right? And so helping teachers in those classrooms build community within their classroom, right? So push in, right? Saying, how do we invite parents into the classroom? How do we do that? So any other strategies, thoughts, comments about? Yes.
Well, as far as parent-teacher conferences, I worked at a high school once where the principal would grill hot dogs and hamburgers for all the parents who came, and we had really good parent-teacher participation. I don't know that you'd have to have a principal buy-in for that, but that worked really, really well at that high school.
It's what works for us in our own homes and families and communities. Why wouldn't it work for the parents? Are folks good, or do you feel like you need something else? Because I could be missing the mark. And it might just be a different question to ask, but let me ask a different question. Are there issues that folks have with dealing with families that we haven't addressed? What is that?
I'm getting more and more phone calls in the last 2 years from parents that are done with these disruptive kids in the classroom and they want them moved out of the classroom. And then also, from a teacher's perspective, when you have 30 kids that want to learn and one that doesn't. So I think we need to kind of take a look at that too.
Mm-hmm. And only because I do what I do, I'm one of those parents, right? And so, but my approach is to talk to the principal about the teacher, because whenever something's destabilized, I'm asking, well, what was going on? Oh, so the last 4 incidents that my son had were at a recess. So I'm thinking supervision, because I'm not thinking he's having a problem in the classroom. And so diagnosing for those parents, that is also a hidden problem or issue when we're talking about suspension. And I've been in an environment where the whole school is Black and Latino. And when kids are getting suspended, it's those parents are saying, well, what about the other kid? Right? If there's 1 suspension, there needs to be 2, right? Or 3, or 4, or 5. And it's just the go-to. And so you do have a sense of, well, I can't really speak to the teacher or this level of supervision or how it's structured or organized or how the counselors are intervening and doing interventions with the class and with those students. So I just want those kids out of my kid's classroom because they keep bugging my kid. That's what it is, right? Basically.
Well, there's like at each grade level, there's one standout that's trauma. There's trauma clearly throughout his life or her life, and the parents are questioning me as to if that's the right placement for that student because he's keeping their child from learning. Mm-hmm. And then there's the Arizona state statute that says if you disrupt the classroom environment, so parents are throwing that at me now. Why is this child allowed to disrupt my student's environment?
So what would be what would be an idea for that situation, right? Who do we focus on, right? The focus is on the poor child, right? So what do we do with that? Any ideas? Because this is real. It's very, very real.
I just think you need to educate the kids in the classroom, but just with the permission from the parents, not necessarily have to go through the details of that specific student's trauma and anything like that, but just teaching the kids and the rest of the classroom what that student is going through as far as certain different things that they have to learn how to do exact type of color, give them some space, curve some space.
So sometimes that does work. That does work where, although the parent says, "Hey, I'm tired of this. You're not doing enough for this kid," to have a conversation, right? Because we already talked about how we're having conversations with teachers about trauma. So we're certainly going to need to have conversations with parents when they raise these issues. So the first intervention when stuff gets thrown out is take a step back, ask questions, and take any opportunity, if the door is open, to provide additional context of the situation. Does that make sense? And talk to the teacher to explain, well, here's the supports, but at some point, depending on what's specifically happening in the class, because as systems, I've seen it, we will say, okay, this one, we're just, whatever they do, we're just gonna contain them. We're just gonna keep them from causing too much damage, and all the kids know about it, and they resent it, and they hate it. And the teachers resent it, and the kids, but the kids, some of the kids have empathy for the child. They do. Some of the kids have empathy for the child. You are a wizard. Now that's magic. When you can convince other students to support that kid. Go ahead.
And I think that as far as from an institutional standpoint of TUSD and school systems, I think that if we can work on ways to streamline the process and speed up the process to get that particular kid the help and the services that they need, I think that that would address a great number of the issues that we're talking about today. To streamline that, help them out, get the kids the help rather than taking too much of a standoff approach while time goes by and while more things happen and finding some way to streamline that and make it faster.
Mm-hmm. And everything we're talking about, depending on how we're thinking about it, is either overwhelming or like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. It's overwhelming when we think about it after the fact. This has happened, this has been brought up, and now we gotta go to a play group with the kids and try, no. That's the part of the job that doesn't work. The part of the job that works is when we're having this conversation and we say, okay, next encounter, next classroom, before an intervention happens, on Monday or Tuesday, we're gonna go, we know we're freaking fly, but we're not dealing with an immediate situation, but we're gonna proactively work with the teacher to come up with, during recess, the problematic child and some friendly, empathetic kids will do a project together. When I was in when we had the group home in the non-public school, that was what they would do. I mean, and these were kids that were straight up disabled, lacking skills, all of that. And two kids would get into a fight or issue, and the staff would say, okay, separately to each kid, okay, well, we'll deal with the situation and say, but you know what? What we'll do is we'll go to McDonald's or we'll go to get some frozen yogurt or we'll go to the park, and he would take both the kids, right, the two combatants, and now they're friends because they just ate ice cream together with the adult, right? And it wasn't a punitive thing. It was like, come on, well, let's just go get some frozen yogurt. We'll deal with the consequences later. And they're actually building a rapport, right? Was there a comment? Okay, so collaborative problem solving. So I threw that out there last week, and it was started by a gentleman named Ross Greene. He wrote a book called The Explosive Child. And what he talks about is how children who are poorly behaved, we blame the parents a little too much for poorly behaved children. Okay? He also says those well-behaved children, parents get a little bit too much credit for how good those kids are. Anybody that has more than one child knows what I'm talking about. Kids are different. They show up as who they are. Either exactly like you or completely different or somewhere in between, right? So what's underneath those declarations is the understanding that people show up with a physiological makeup, a genetic makeup, an emotional makeup that is so unique to them. And how they respond, how you have two kids, one boy, one girl, right? And zodiacs, everything comes into play with how they're gonna then grow up and start walking and talking and interacting in their environment. It's gonna be largely about who they are, right? And so if who they are is not compatible to the environment, we're gonna say they're problematic. This is before we even talk about throwing trauma on top of it, right? But if the way you show up in the institutions you have to interact with on a daily basis is not really compatible to your style, right? You don't really like to sit still, right? It's just not in you to sit still, okay? And so you gotta find a profession or a way of existing in your environment where you can do you. And so kids have 18 years of conformity before they even had the opportunity to really get out there on their own and do things the way they want to do. So what Ross Greene talks about is when you add trauma on top of that, and in fact, if you're not really compatible, you're going to experience more trauma because the environment is going to continually give you that feedback. You got to stop moving, right? Then it's just like and so for the child, especially the most defensive child, they're actually blaming themselves. Comment.
And I think also sometimes the system itself seems to disturb these children already having trauma. Because the system I have seen, for example, some schools, you found there are many people dealing with behavior issues. You found the MTSS coordinator, you found the counselor, you found the dean, you found, I don't know, this type of person. So I remember one day, he told me to talk to one of the students, he is an African. So when I tried to approach him, I was asking him, listen, I called him and I said, I wanted to talk to him, and he said, he called me when I started talking. He was upset once, he said, why? This is calling me, telling me this one is calling me, telling me this one is calling me. Whom do you want me to listen? And then I said, do you want to talk to me, or if you don't have time, then maybe when you get time, you'll come back to talk to me. So it gives me some, I was feeling when he left, then he left. Then the following day, when I saw him, he was quiet. I called him again and I was trying to talk to him. So he was upset because every person that he wanted to talk to, 10 people, he talked to one person, this one coming with this strategy, this one coming with this one. So we confuse them. And I really didn't take enough time sometimes. And when I looked at his good, I'm going to call him, we're going to talk, and he will be kind. But when a student has a problem, we sometimes tend to bring a lot of things. The other thing what I would say is that when there are many soul staff doing the same thing, sometimes also you don't see the barrier. I remember one day we were talking to a student, and this, I will not mention the function, that person. He comes in, we are talking to a student, and he came, no, he started to talk, a lot of English. And then he told the student to go. He didn't know where we started, he didn't know what we're doing. So when there are a lot of stuff, I said, this is a professional, so who's supposed to know what he's doing. and he found 3 others talking to somebody, and just go in, start to talk, and he tells you, maybe because he thinks he's the right person. So I think sometimes I've seen this is to be a problem. Many people doing the same thing, and you don't know where there is a limit of this one, where there is a limit of this one. And maybe it's where also sometimes comes a problem when we deal with the teachers. If you come and you think you are a professional, you know better than the teacher, instead of coming with the purpose of helping, he might have some loopholes in the interventions. So you need to have manuals how to approach a grown-up person, because these teachers, they are dealing with this student every day. You just maybe come once, or you see once. He is dealing him from when he comes inside and when he's gonna go back home. So he's dealing with this person. So I think they need also help, not to be taught, but how we support them.
Yes, communication can really break down, right? And so really focusing on thank you, all right? So back to collaborative problem solving. So Ross Greene, The Explosive Child, talks about collaborative problem solving, and what he does is he talks about, that's good. So Ross Greene will tell us the common explanations for misbehavior, and we'll go through them really quickly, and then we'll get into what is basically plan A and plan B. It's going to be really straightforward. You're going to love it. So he just wants attention, right? So this is a reframe. This is right here. Write these down. You're going to get them as well. When you hear a teacher use these exact words, you don't correct them or say you're wrong. You rephrase it with the different lens. So, yeah, he's always, bugging students, and he just wants, or she just wants attention. Well, damn it. You can make jokes. That's kind of how I feel when I go home and no one's listening, right? Lighten the mood. Humor almost always works. Almost always works. He just wants his own way. Right, and so just as we're saying these, it's clear, it's like, it's a judgment. But then if you really look at it, don't we all? Right, so there's a ... He just wants attention, and it's not the right time. And so we can also add that piece. He just wants attention, like we all do. It's just not at the right time when you're trying to get things done. I get it, continue, right? If you've got the report. I mean, I can't tell you how to deliver it, right? I'm just saying, when you hear these things, they're going in the right direction just from the wrong attitude, right? And the attitude is, it's bad. This child, I need these children to sit down, be quiet, don't say a word, right? Because we're frizzled, right? So he's manipulating us. It takes advanced emotional skills to manipulate an adult. Otherwise, what you're saying as an adult is you're easily manipulable. So, no, the children aren't manipulating us. They are trying to meet their needs in any means necessary. So in the milieu of the non-public school where kids are getting access to snacks and food, and they go, right, so they're trying to meet basic needs. That's what's going on. So they go to staff A, who they cussed out, and staff A says, no, you can't have a snack. Okay? And then they go to staff B. Staff B says, okay, come on, let me get you a snack. Now staff A and staff B, and we call that staff splitting. You just split the staff because you're manipulating us. No, I'm not. I'm hungry. I'm hungry, and I won't take no for an answer, right? Even if you say I'm going to get in trouble. He's making bad choices, don't we all? In whatever arena, right? Developmentally appropriate, though. Even up to the teenage years, all the way to your 22, 3, 4 years old. Does the frontal cortex, called executive functioning, get fully developed? Now, it's not like from 0 to 100, right? It's like no executive functioning for 16, 17. They have some, right? But it's not fully developed. So they're going to continue to make mistakes in their speech, in their behavior, in their choices, right? So again, these are teachable moments. Yeah, I'm making bad choices. Well, and then go down a level, say, well, at least they are, whatever it is that they did that was developmentally appropriate and not problematic, right? Always adding those behaviors, because a lot of times with fights, for example, someone is in trouble for hitting a kid after trying to walk away. After saying, hey man, I don't even want to fight you. Hey man, leave me alone, I ain't got time for this, right? That happens sometimes, right? And then, you know, I can say, man, leave me alone, man, stop it, stop it, stop it. You just say stop it 8 times, we're gonna acknowledge that. We're gonna say, that is an advanced skill. This person knew it was wrong, identified what they needed to be safe, and communicated it to the appropriate people. We can't always say that about ourselves, right? His parents don't provide enough structure. And when we're talking about structure, we're typically talking about having a bedtime, right? Having a wake-up time, having a clear path to school, and having the expectation that they're going to do homework, right? Am I give me a thumbs up if I'm correct, right? In what we're talking about when we're talking about structure. And so, not making excuses, but I know as a functional adult, it can be a challenge, right? Because the kids go through stuff, and so the structure is directly correlated to my ability to sustain myself and my household and pay the bills and this and that and the other. And if I'm unemployed, well, providing structure for my child might take a backseat to providing food, providing shelter to my child. And that shelter may not be structured because it's not a stable housing situation, but it's shelter. But we don't have, and those are exactly the situations where it's most important for there to still remain some semblance of structure. So I'm not saying, oh, those parents can't provide structure. Of course they can. It's not going to be as durable, and it's not necessarily going to be enough for what we need. He has a bad attitude. His brother was the same way. Wow, really? He's testing limits. Yes, that is what the brain is designed to do at all times. So these are the common explanations for misbehavior that lead us to believe that these students are problematic. So this is all good stuff. So kids do well if they can. This is an important concept that Ross Greens talks about. In the milieu, in the environment. So what's a behavior that we try to foster our young people in doing? Say apologies, right? Do we still do that? All right, so you need to apologize. You need to write a letter. We still do that, right? But it's 2019, so it's not just an apology, it's here's what I did, here's how I felt about, right? We do a little more, but basically, kids do well if they can. And that means that if a kid immediately hit another kid or put their head down, whatever, they're actually doing the best that they can. The error in thinking as adults is when children make choices that they're making worse choices than they could make and have the capacity to make. That's the difference. If we feel like, look, you've got the capacity to just work 2 jobs while you're not getting a paycheck, or just take out a loan. You can just go take out a loan, right? I'm not really respecting the fact that you're dealing with something that is way over your head. And so kids do well if they can in settings. So you might see challenging behaviors in the classroom, but you might see them on the yard. Fine, I saw you not trip off that kid. Well, they're in a different environment where they feel safer, and they can be more patient with other kids. They can be more responsible or more supportive of other students in those other environments. But when you translate it to this environment and they're not performing consistently, it's because they can't, right? And when we say can't, we don't mean permanently. We mean they don't have the skills. It's called lagging skills. They know it's a skill. They know it's out there because we keep telling them to do it. Apologize, breathe, leave them alone, walk away, tell an adult, but over and over and over again, they take it into their own heads. And we're wondering, why is that? Why is that? So there's lagging skills that lead us to believe that they're making poor choices. And so kids do well if they can, not because they don't want to. And that's how he says it. So your explanation for a kid's behavior challenging, it challenges how you're willing to help. So if I believe that, hey, you know what, you're just here to cause trouble, you're just trying to disrupt the classroom, you don't want to focus, then we're going to resent that, and then we're going to want to punish that, right? So resentment and punishment, because at the end of the day, hey, the training was nice, it was cool, but I don't have the resources right now. So the mirror with collaborative problem solving that you'll see if you try to implement it is what's going on for the young person is a mirror for what's going on for us as the adults who are trained on how to respond and yet default to, come on, what were you thinking? Why? How many times? I remember when I first started hearing my parents as I was talking. It was scary. But it happens. So let's jump into what it looks like. So there's an incident. Collaborative problem solving is for episodic events in the classroom or in the school milieu. And basically, it's checking your lens and going into the 3 options for problem solving. So there's dealing with misbehavior. And this is what we're all trained to do is deal with the problem, right? That's our training. We have a whole system of support to deal with the problem. And so when we do that, we pour more energy and more reinforcement into us as a system dealing with problems. And we actually exacerbate the problem because we put all of our energy into it. Putting the most energy where you have the most control. And we have total control to suspend the kid. Can't stop me, I'm the principal. Yeah! Whatever, statistics, my job school, we got test scores, right? This kid is making the environment unsafe, right? So I feel good because I'm doing something that I have control over. Because the alternative, and I certainly don't want to seem like I don't have the authority or the professional capacity, so we default to fixing the problem. What that does is it establishes how we're going to react and how we're going to respond. So in order to manage your own reaction, you have the option to first gather information about the environment. The first is with a scan, right, an eye scan. Who's doing what, what's happening, because 9 times out of 10 there's the incident, which is either you witnessing it or it being brought to your attention as a teacher that a problem has happened, right? You hear it, you see it, you witness it, and then you have to immediately jump in. And what do? We automatically, without training, go into the person we think is the most dangerous and get them and grab them and remove them, and right? And that immediate step is a guaranteed escalation. It's a guaranteed escalation. Well, what are we supposed to do? Okay, so if the person isn't actually flinging and throwing stuff, let's say it's just a profanity or it's a disruption or it's a outburst, right? There's lots of ways we can deal with that. Whoa, I'm gonna deal with that later. Okay, and then just continue, right? And if the outburst subsides, boom, right? Now you gotta remember to get back to it later, because if they use profanity or blah, 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 you want the other kids to feel safe by reinforcing that you will address rule violations in the classroom that disrupt other students. But you didn't make a big deal out of it. You could have, but you didn't have to. There's nothing that says you have to stop and make a big deal out of something. And the chances are you'll do that if you're not good, right? And so again, so the plan A is authoritative. Something happens, hey, this is what you gotta do. That's plan A, right? Guess what, folks? Plan A works. Oh, it works, right? For those students that it works for. And it doesn't work for the students that it doesn't work for. So I'm gonna make up a statistic. 2/3 of the students, that works. Hey, stop that. Put that down. No, no, no. Not now. Boom, boom. They're straightening up. But then, you know, we talked about that one kid or those 2 kids or those 3 kids, and it's a rumble. It's like, I got to address it. And then you pick up that rope, and then you just start digging in, right? And what if you drop the rope in that moment? So that is called plan B. So I told you to drop the rope. You said, that's crazy. I still got to deal with the situation. So Ross Greene gives us what to do after you drop the rope, and that's plan B. Plan B has 3 things. And so plan B is checking our lens of kids are acting up because they want to. All right, we're going to talk about empathy. So the first thing that happens in a collaborative problem-solving scenario where, let's ground this in a behavior. So we'll start with a real simple behavior, tapping the pencil, right? How many times do teachers deal with the behavior of noise? Noise and movement, tapping, anybody? Is that, and they're just pissed, right? They're just tapping, 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 because it's a test and it's quiet time and you know, you're not supposed to be making noise. And so we'll use that as an example to say, as a counselor or a teacher, they go in and plan A is, of course, what? Stop tapping. You're making noise. It's annoying. Stop it. Right? That's plan A. And for 2/3, boom, it works. Keep moving. So for the kid that it doesn't work with, maybe they try it. Hey, stop tapping. And they keep tapping. Then it's like, okay, let me try plan B. It's really that simple, folks. So it's not that and the thing about, we don't have to spend a lot of time on that, but the authoritative approach is fine, especially if you have a good attitude. You don't have to have a crappy attitude to be authoritative. You can say, hey, come on, you guys, stop that. Come on, get it together, right? That's authoritative. Plan B is immediately when that didn't work for whatever kid. And so plan B is, okay, now what's our lens? Check your lens. As soon as you realize, oh, that didn't work, then plan B. Plan B says, okay, let me check my lens, right? Let me take a breath. Empathy is where you gather information so as to clarify the student's concern or perspective on the unsolved problem. So the way that we do empathy is simply that. I need more information, basically, right? Because on the surface, with the 2/3 of the kids, they just needed me to remind them. But now that I've reminded them and this other student is still having a problem, well, now I got to go to plan B. Now I need more information. Now I need to know okay, well, what's going on for the student. And how we do that is the most important part. So can I get a volunteer? Okay, I'll just pick on somebody. All right, so I'm going to pick on you. Okay, so you're tapping, right? So start tapping. She's tapping. Okay, everybody stop. She's still tapping. Oh, hey, what's up?
Nothing.
Okay, well, we're getting our work done and you're tapping and it might be a little bit disruptive to the other students. So, okay, she gave in really easily. Thank you. That was good. That was good. And it should happen like that too, because you see I got below her, right? So in another example, if she kept going, right, and maybe I wasn't as nice, right? She keeps tapping, then we have to go through step 2. So what I did was I said, hey, what's up? That is the most critical step, is that first step is just saying, what's up? Instead of saying, boom, indictment, right? Here's your charge, right? We jump to the legal. That's assault, right? And instead saying, what's up? So when you say what's up, the kid might know, okay, I'm tapping and now I'm about to get in trouble for tapping. But the question this person just asked me gave me a world of possibilities to answer. What's up? Well, I'm tired. I'm hungry. I'm bored. I'm whatever. And that's if they're verbal and able to identify what's going on with them. If they're not, they might say, nothing wrong with me. I'm fine, right? So you'll get a whole host of responses, but that's information that you didn't have if you jumped in like, hey, stop tapping, you're tapping, go, right? So you need to get more information. So if they're specific, I'm tired, I'm hungry, I'm this, I'm that, I'm da-da-da, so-and-so's bothering me, then you're like, okay, this is high functioning. This is high functioning because they know what's going on, they know what they're doing, they know why they're doing it, and they're able to communicate it to you, the teacher, the authority, the counselor. If they're like, then you're like, oh, okay, I gotta go deeper, right? Because they have problematic behavior and they're not acknowledging it, and they're not necessarily aware of what's going on, that they need to have this behavior, and so they're probably in a state of, right, defensiveness. And so then we have to define the problem. So when the invitation was, hey, what's up? She was like, whatever, I'm tapping away. And I was like, okay, cool. What's going on around you is people are trying to focus. And this is disruptive to the classroom, right? So it's not, I didn't put it on her to say, you're wrong. I said, okay, that's cool. You're over here just doing your thing. Here's how you're impacting the environment. And it's a concern for me. And I'm bringing it up to you because I need it to be a concern to you, because we're going to have to work together to find a solution that is less disruptive. So and that process should take a minute, right? If you're really good at doing that first step of checking your lens, hey everybody, and that's the most difficult part for us. If on my best day with the coffee and I found a parking spot right there, and right, then I can roll with some pushback. But I forgot to I left my coffee right there on the counter. I can see it in my mind's eye. I just left it, and then there wasn't coffee here, right? It's all about whatever gets us going. And so the kid is pushing back, and I'm like, and just in that moment, I'm not checking my lens, and I'm slightly aware of it too. We're slightly aware of it when we just get upset and get frustrated. So the invitation step is really important because it allows us to check our lens and de-escalate the situation because it's already been escalated for us, right? So on the reverse, when we're dealing with challenges with students, by the time we're aware of it, they're already escalated. And what always happens is, as we're dealing with the situation, their crisis cycle, and I'll explain the crisis cycle briefly, we follow their crisis cycle right behind them. So after you invite them to say what's up, they have to then claim who they are and what they're doing and why they're doing it, and then we come up with a solution. So I explain, hey, well, this is what I'm seeing. And again, I'm not saying, well, you're tapping on the desk and you're being disruptive and you're disturbing people, right? No. You say, you don't want to criminalize the behavior. You want to say, hey, this is the behavior and this is the impact, and is there a way we can come up with an agreement? And then the final step for plan B, if they agree, is to give them a couple options. Come up with a couple options that you're cool with. Don't give an option like, well, you could either do this or you could go home, or right? You want to give two options. Well, maybe you can tap with your eraser on your notepad just a little softly, because for them, they need to move and they are trying to find. So another neurologist who is world renowned talks about when students are doing that they're trying to find their core rhythm from when they were an embryo. I was like, wow. Okay, we all come out with, and we all have a rhythm. We all have our own rhythm. It's literally true. You dance to the beat of your own drum. It's a fact. It's a neurological fact, says the experts, right? So you come up with a couple options. Maybe you could use your eraser and tap it here, or maybe, if you think you can stop, no, I can stop. And then what we're doing is we're soft shoeing their lagging skills, and we're supporting them to try out these skills, not because they don't wanna, but because they haven't been given the opportunity. They haven't been supported and trained. So when you come up with those agreements and then they choose the agreement, well, they're gonna honor it. And then they're going to forget and start tapping again. And then when you reintroduce it again, they'll see that. And the benefit of using collaborative problem solving is it's really effective with a lot of those low-hanging things, and teachers can use it over and over and over again. And then when there's a big crisis, like a fight or something like that, they can also use collaborative problem solving. But one of the challenges with interventions for fights and for difficult things is we don't really have an opportunity to practice it right, because every time we're practicing it, we're elevated, we're escalated, and we're having difficulty actually remembering what was in the training to ask, well, what do I say? What's happening? What you doing? No, what's up? Oh yeah, what's up? You don't get the phrase right, and it's okay, right? And we said earlier, we're gonna make mistakes. We're gonna make mistakes. So, talk amongst yourselves about collaborative problem solving, plan A versus plan B, and the empathy step for about 5 minutes, just to saturate your understanding of it. That's what the purpose of this is. So, here I am intruding on your conversation. So rude. All right, if you could finish your last sentence, I would love to get some feedback. Collaborative problem solving, plan A, plan B. What do you think? What do you think? Let's get some comments. Let's get some, I'm just gonna start putting the mic in front of people. Collaborative problem solving, what do you think? Yes.
I like the plan B with the empathy step because it's really non-confrontational, and a lot of kids really don't like to be confronted, and I think that would work very well.
Awesome. Other thoughts, ideas? So collaborative problem solving, and actually, I feel like it's a success when I start talking and people keep talking, because it's like, no, you're engaged. And so I don't feel bad. So continue to just keep talking. I don't. Because this is, you got to get what you need to get, right? Not what I think you should get. So that's why I keep checking in. So time slips away. So I do want to overlay collaborative problem solving with the crisis cycle. I had a couple options. You guys probably already trained up on circles, RJ circles and community circles and healing circles and all that. So I want to give you all some science behind crisis, because during the break, I always get that story at the break of the extreme situation, right? And when we're talking about extreme situation, I'm not going to give any one person feedback on an extreme situation, because it's not yours to fix. Oh my God, a kid, you come in first grader, boom, they punch you. That's a much bigger problem than this training. And so, you know, it involves a long, the bigger the problem, the longer it takes to address it, right? But it's useful to understand the crisis cycle when these type of extreme incidents happen. The crisis cycle is basically a neurological pathway, a physiological response pattern that happens when we're triggered, when we're in crisis. So what is crisis? Crisis is fighting, hitting, kicking, screaming, just overall disruptive behavior, right? And when that happens, as the adults, we have to respond. We can't defer. We can't say, oh, I'll get to that later, right? You're in it. Everything else stops. You got to deal with the crisis. So the crisis cycle, what happens is there's called an antecedent. So whatever the crisis is, the first thing you do is you recognize, okay, something happened the week before, the day before, the night before, the morning of, or all of the above, right? It's called an antecedent, and that's when a young person, because every young person, every adult, every human has a baseline, right? Which is your average of temperament. You know, if you average out your temperament, going 6 months back and 6 months forward, that's your baseline. So our baseline is that for most of us, we're pretty much, we can take a lot, right? We can take certain things without, you know, what would it take you to go off and hit somebody? A lot, right? Whereas for the kids, it might not take much. So for kids, their baseline is already elevated. So understand that from a physiological reality, we are way more powerful. As adults, we have cars, we have choices and options that are backed up by money and power, you know, to influence our environment. They have to ask permission to pee. They have to be told where to sit. They have to be told what to write. And that is incredibly frustrating for a high-functioning young person. So for a low-functioning young person, it ain't happening. Not all the time. And so when a crisis, so there's an antecedent and then there's the trigger. So what are the triggers? The triggers are the behavior that sparked the crisis. And that is, stop looking at me, right? It could be something from stop looking at me to you're kicking me under the table to whatever it is. That's not the important piece. The important piece is it happened and now it's causing this issue that now we have to address. So I'm gonna go through the crisis cycle and I want you to think about the normal curve. Not to bring you back to school, but the normal curve that goes up and down, right? So there's the antecedent is not even on the chart. The trigger's at the bottom. And then there's what's called the escalation phase. The escalation phase is our best shot at preventing a crisis. The earlier, the better. And the way that works is you come in and you try your collaborative problem solving. First you tried the authoritative, that didn't work, then you come in with collaborative problem solving. And that is at the escalation phase, right? Before things get out of hand. Let's say you failed. You failed. It's not your fault, but you were unable to throw them off of their path to crisis. And so then it escalates. And usually because it's multiple kids involved and you're trying to address one kid and then the other kid, and I'm talking to you as if you're teachers, but this is what's happening in the classroom and it can also happen in the milieu as well. So it could apply. And ultimately, anyways, you get to the top. And also what happens, I don't want to miss this step. Once our initial intervention doesn't work, right, we try plan A and then we try plan B. When plan B doesn't work, then what do? We go right back to plan A. We go right back. Okay, forget it. All right, look, I'm going to take control of the situation. And without fail, right, boom, crisis. Crisis. And so crisis is when the worst of what's happened in that whole situation is happening right there in that moment. And that could be throwing a chair, that could be just them cussing incessantly, spitting, whatever it is. And you have to deal with the situation the way you have to deal with it. And then immediately, because no one can sustain that type of energy, right? So now we're talking about physiological realities. A kid that's cussing and yelling, sure, there are some kids that can go. And they've got stamina. And it's not a 2-minute tantrum. It's going longer than that. But in general, what goes up must come down. And so the important piece about the crisis cycle as well is when it starts going down, that is the most, so we have to be mindful of what's going on for the young person. Then I'm going to tell you what's going on for the adult, and then I'm going to tell you how we bring it together. So what's going on for the young person, after they've peaked in their crisis, they're going to come down. And the way they're going to come down is to drop the rope. That's when the kids drop the rope. Is after they've peaked and then now you got them in the office or you got them isolated and 4 minutes have passed, 5 minutes have passed, 10 minutes have passed, and they begin to calm down. They begin to say less. They begin to do less because their recovery. So then what happens is as they're de-escalating, because they got to recuperate their energy, they go down below their baseline, right? So their baseline is, I'm ready to fight any minute. Now I've had this crisis and it's run its course. And now 15, 20 minutes later, I'm beat. I'm done. My emotions are shot. My regulation is off. And dang, I just need to relax. I just need to sit down. I just need to calm down. And in that moment, we need to leave them alone. In that moment, when we see them calming down, put your hands together and say, thank you, whoever I pray to, because I've got an opportunity now for them to calm down. That's what you wanted in the first place. That's what you were trying to do when you tried to intercede before at the escalation phase. So now you've got it on the other end of the crisis cycle. But here's where we make the mistake. We're like, oh, now we see that as a victory. I have defeated you. Now let's talk about your consequences. And so, right? And I'm talking about myself primarily because I've seen it all, right? And so then we jump in and we think, and that's when we start to feel good because we're saying, hey, you know you didn't do that, and they're just like, whatever, okay. And then we start talking about consequences. So here's what's happening. So then, have anyone seen this happen, by the way, what I'm describing? Is this a foreign thing? Okay, so you've seen this happen. So have you also seen, as they start to de-escalate, the young people, the adult says, okay, no, or this is my favorite. Kid's like, forget it, I'm leaving, right? And then the kid leaves. Let them leave. Follow, shadow, send the kid or adult, but let them leave. Because what they're doing is they're de-escalating. But the mistake we make is, hey, no, I'm not done with you. You come back here. And then what happens? Boom, they go back up. They go back up. They're like, oh, I didn't get enough of a break, but I'm back. I'm activated again, right? And why is that? That's because while the young person is going through their escalation phase, their crisis cycle, the adult is going through the same crisis cycle. But our crisis cycle is lagging. It's a little bit behind. So as they're going down, we're peaking. We're now at our, so then in every crisis, typically you have a child acting up and an adult acting up. But it looks different when the adult acts up, not because we're bad, not because we're doing it wrong, it's because it's out of sequence. It's out of sequence. Everything you're doing, you got to do it, just not at that time. You try it at the escalation phase, and once you lose that, you got to wait. You got to come back. It's like, after 4 o'clock, after 5 o'clock, that deposit is not going to hit your account till the next day. I'm sorry. You got to come back at another time because it's too late. And that's what the crisis cycle is all about. The additional piece that's going to blow your mind is why we have the reason why the adult having a crisis cycle and it lagging the young person's crisis cycle is twofold. One is when we're getting escalated, when there's a crisis, physiologically, what's happening? What's happening to the blood pressure, the breathing, right? Elevated, the flushed finger, right? The mind, the emotions, everything is heightened and escalated, and it's the fight, flight, or freeze. So what's happening cognitively is there's a corresponding dip in cognitive ability that mirrors the escalation. Exactly. So when that child is at peak crisis, what does that mean when you now have the least amount of cognitive resources of your life in that moment of crisis? And we're saying, la, 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 and here's the other thing about the crisis, when they don't have the capacity to what this actually means is they're triggered and they're not accurately responding to their environment. So you're saying words, it doesn't matter what the words you're saying, they're hearing, he's trying to hurt me, he's trying to harm me, I'm gonna get in trouble, right? And so I'm gonna continue to defend myself. And it becomes problematic because we think in that moment when they have the least amount of cognitive capacity that they're defying us, right? And in actuality, they have no capacity to really cognitively manage themselves or the situation. And guess what? Neither do we. If we're involved in the crisis right along with them. That's the important piece to know, folks, is when a young person's in a crisis and we manage it way differently. Understand that, right? We manage it, especially if we have a little bit of authority, right? Then what do we use? We use our power to punish. We use our power to take away the remaining things that child has that brings them a micron of joy in the educational environment. And because we don't trust the parents or have challenges dealing with the parents. And hey, you know, I'm tired of hearing of these parents who feel like their kids are just being picked on and the school's not doing it, right? We're making judgments all along the way, and we're not bad for it, but ultimately it's not going to get us where we're trying to get to. It's not going to get us the outcome we're trying to get to. So understanding collaborative problem solving as an intervention and practicing it can be a way to build the teacher's capacity to address trauma in the classrooms. Use this tool it's like, not everything is a nail, right? If you're a hammer, but it can be used for many, 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 many different situations, just like circles can, right? And particularly the empathy step, because it's what we really skip over. We really gloss over, right? The empathy step, you think you're practicing collaborative problem solving, and you're just like, okay, what's up? What's going on, right? Was that empathetic? It was right, frustrated, right? The way she looked at me too, it's like, right. But if it's like, hey, what's up? Right? Hey, I'm still looking at, right? It's just, he said, I'm just sad. So we have to be careful not to skip the empathy step. And how do we know when we've skipped the empathy step? Right? So when the person looks petrified or they're just like, right? You skip the empathy step. Because something happens when you really get to their level, when you really take a breath and be like, check your lens. I'm missing information. Let me take the empathetic step. What's up? You will see the eyes, the pupils, they were like, right? And then they will respond. You can feel it, you can see it, and that's how you practice Plan B. And then understanding the crisis cycle and how that works, remembering that as adults, we're traumatized too. And when we bring back the lens of complex trauma, all right, and not to activate anyone, but as adults, we have survived trauma. We have survived complex trauma, episodic trauma, right? And we're not over it. We've dealt with it sometimes, and we're functional enough with it sometimes, and we are continually working on it and improving and learning more about ourselves, but we're all in progress, right? And so understanding the crisis cycle is an important humility piece, right? And recognizing and challenging the power imbalance and recognizing these kids are in crisis, they're causing disruptions, we don't have an easy fix, and I do want to say this too. What I'm asking you to do is very, very, very involved. I'm not saying it's hard or difficult. It's just a lot, right? We can all agree on that. I'm not telling you anything new. And, you know, the elephant in the room is sometimes people work to their pay grade, right? You heard, oh, that's above my pay grade, right? And it's not all the time just this Friday or just last Tuesday or just right. So, and that's the other thing to keep in mind, just like the crisis cycle, we all go through periods of inspiration and burnout. And so the empathy step starts with us, being empathetic to ourselves and recognizing I'm a good person. I'm still a good person, but right now I'm not feeling it. I'm dealing with some other stuff, and right now I'm not feeling it. You're not abdicating your responsibility to show up and be a professional. You're just recognizing and acknowledging that you're a human being and that you need empathy for yourself so that you can be more careful with others, right? If you're finding yourself being resistant or hesitant to this empathy piece, well, maybe it starts with yourself. My favorite example, metaphor, is the airplane instructions for the change in cabin pressure. In Southwest, they're so hilarious. I love their jokes. They're like, we don't anticipate a change in cabin pressure. I assure you, if we did, we wouldn't have showed up to work today. But if there is, then the mask will drop down. And what do they tell you to do, especially if you have small children or someone that needs assistance sitting next to you? What do? Save yourself first. That was how the Southwest attendant said it, right? And it's funny, that's funny, because especially as a mom, what? Honestly, raise your hand, moms. You probably never had that change in campus pressure. But if it happened, would you do that? Would you put on your own mask first? No, and you both perish. And that's what makes us human. That's beautiful. But you have to secure your own mask first. You have to make sure you got that coffee or that green tea or that smoothie, much healthier, electrolyte water. Every little thing helps. Every little thing helps. Empathy for self. Okay, we're running out of time. I want to have you all have the last word. I want comments. We can be discussing things and bringing stuff back up. But we got the other mic. Where's the other mic? Got runner. Okay. Comments on collaborative problem solving or the crisis cycle? Questions? Comments?
Right here.
Get it? Yeah.
Come on, Mr.
I'm too slow.
I want to ask about the empathy step, because I have students and I work at elementary schools that they're not in touch with their empathy. So when you approach them on that issue, or when you go, well, how does your behavior impact the rest of the class? And I guarantee you I can get this out of anybody from second grader up, I don't care. And so that next step, well, here's the problem with you not caring. So now I'm totally off task because I'm trying to get little Sally to finish up her test. And now little Sally wants to discuss why she doesn't care. So so they're not touching that empathy part. They don't see their behavior impacting the class or don't care or won't recognize that fact.
Good question, because the way I laid it out was pretty linear and pretty straightforward. And I didn't give you a whole lot of other ways to invite. And so as adults, that is the homework piece of coming up with a style that works for you first. And then when that doesn't work, right, there's plan A, then there's plan B. And if that doesn't work, you go back to plan A and regroup and try to figure out, okay, how did I invite this student? With empathy, you're right. When you first have someone try to look at another person's perspective and they reject even considering that there's another perspective, right? Typically, as an adult even, is because, well, you haven't acknowledged that I've been wronged. You haven't acknowledged that I have needs and concerns and issues and they're not being addressed and this, that, and the other. So if you try, write that one down. If you try to lead with, okay, what's up with you, right? What are some ways you're being mistreated, or what are some ways you're being challenged, or what are some ways you're having a hard time? And listening, that fosters empathy when you practice listening to people. Empathy is too vague, right? It's, what's that? Is that compassion or empathy or caring, or what's the difference and where's the line? And it's an emotional thing. I can't pinpoint it, but you can listen and you can ask questions that do not put another human being on the spot, even though, hey, I'm talking about you and your stuff, but here we are looking at a third space. So acknowledging what's going on for them might help. Let's say that doesn't work either. Then you have other options available. You can use, right, metaphors or finding a way. The more you listen, you're listening. What I'll do is I'll listen for examples. Oh, okay, so when you went to the store with your mom and this person did something to your mom, right? And you're not flipping it. Well, what if somebody did that to you? How would you feel? I don't care. But if you ask that empathy invitation, which is basically what it is, an empathy invitation, like I'm trying to get you to see somebody else's perspective connected to their family. Not in an offensive way or somebody did that to your mom, right? But in a way that's like, hey, you have a brother and a sister and a mom and this, and that's also a good one too. Either their friend, you know, if their friend's been wronged, say, hey, when somebody did that to your friend, how did you feel about that? And then the young person can be more objective. Oh, you're not talking about me anymore. You're talking about this. I can be a little less defensive and come off of my truth a little bit, right? Does that make sense? Go ahead.
Well, I'm an elementary school counselor, so it might be different for high school counselors. But one of the things when I'm teaching the kids and I have that kid, sometimes I stop and say, is there something that you're really good at? And they'll say, you know, I play really good video games. What particular video game? So they'll tell me, I say, could you come up and tell us how to play that video game? And they'll come up, and while they're teaching, I'll start talking to somebody or distracting them, and I keep doing this, you know, and they stop and look at me, and then I say, oh, go ahead, you know, teach us, and then I'll distract them, and then after a minute I'll say, so how did that feel? How'd that feel to have me interrupt you every 2 minutes while you're trying to teach? And they're just looking at me, and that's a way to teach, or to help them to see what they're doing, why they need to stop doing that. And it really has been effective.
Absolutely, absolutely. I've done that so many times where you got 5 or 6 kids, you take one kid, you put them in charge of the others, and you say, okay, this was, you try to make it fun, like we're gonna have fun, and you're gonna be their teacher, and then they quickly are like, I'll never be a teacher. But I'm old enough now, this is some good news, folks, because I never heard a kid say, yeah, I want to be a teacher since I started back in '95. And now I'm seeing adults who are teaching, who are coming back with Master's of Social Work. See, I'm in my happy place now. And seeing these young adults who struggled in the profession. It's beautiful. Who else? Take a few minutes, talk to your table. We've got 15 minutes. What are your takeaways from understanding trauma, complex trauma, PTSD, understanding, look, we're talking to teachers, we're reaching out to parents and families, and as counselors, we're managing administrative, structural things, and as counselors, you all have this really pivotal role. So I'm seeing and articulating your role as a pivotal piece. No one else can do what you do. No other position or role has the specific function that you have of bringing together the teacher's concerns and needs. Remember last week? Every disruption in the classroom is an unsolved problem or an unmet need. And that's why collaborative problem solving is about the empathy step. Hey, what's up? What's going on? Because I know what's bugging me, but I know there's something else going on for you. And so understanding how we work as counselors with all of these different stakeholders and how do we represent and have empathy for each of those roles. And it's sometimes so contentious, it feels like, well, if you're taking the parent side, then you don't understand what I gotta go through as a teacher. And if you're taking the teacher side, then you're just like the rest of them, and this system doesn't care about my kids, and da, da, da. But walking away with the ability and practicing, and you practice with the teachers you feel the most comfortable with. Because this isn't about you building their skills, this is about you building your skills. It's way easier to build your skills in working with the families than trying to fix other people. That's way harder. And so building up your skills with the low-hanging fruit, with the families you have the best rapport with the teachers you have the best rapport with the students you have the best rapport with, and practice, 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 so that when you do first start trying these, and probably you already do it, it's, a lot of times in these trainings, it gets explained in a way, oh, that's what I do. Oh, that's what's happening. You already experience it. It's just framing it for you. And a lot of times, how many of you are good at something? You don't know why. You don't know how. Oh, where'd you learn how to speak? I don't know. I don't know. People let me talk. And then they listen. And then I just kept talking. I don't know. I can't remember. But here it is. And so, takeaways. Yes.
For me, first I want to say thank you, because I think all of us here in this room as counselors and social workers, we are doing it from our heart. And when you said kids want to do well, every day that has to be our mantra. We have to have hope, and I do know this. kids want to be good, but there are things that get in their way. So I appreciate that you brought this to us philosophically for me. I really do. Thank you.
And thank you. I realize I gave you 2 instructions. So go ahead and talk amongst your group to help to further process. Yes, you are correct. Okay. So after chatting with your table mates, let's get a comment from somebody that hasn't spoken up yet. Come on. Okay, here we go.
One of the things that we highlighted on our table was nurturing. You know, that most of the students do not nurture at home or whatever their environment is. Students that are raised in group homes and how they run to us and they want that hug, and be responsive to that hug. The other thing is that we are not their only influence. We talk about the one kid being bad and the one kid being good, is that the parents are doing what they can, but they're not the only influence. You know, there are other factors when it comes to making those decisions or behaviors.
Nurturing emotionally too is they always blame the mother. It's messed up, and that's what the experts say. Is that hug, just that all that affection and that caring and that sense. And fathers can deliver it and transmit it too. Yes, of course. Who else? What else?
I think last Friday and this Friday for me, my takeaway was to be, it's simplistic, but just to remain cognizant of where I am as each student walks into my office in that moment, because something might have happened with the student previously that changed my lens or impacted me somehow, positively or negatively, and that it's okay for me to tell the high school students to be fired. So that when they come in, I'm ready and I can give them whatever it is they may need in terms of the attention so that the empathy phase can be present.
That's a good point, because some of you are aware of energy before they even reach your room. Sometimes you don't notice it until you're in the space in terms of where you're at. Is what we're talking about, where you're at. And then some of us, if you're like me, it's always after the fact. Like, oh, that's what was going on. Yes?
Yeah. Hi, my name is Eric Brown. And what we have to understand is that as they're going through the crisis cycle, that we may also be going through the crisis cycle ourselves, and understanding that, honoring that, and realizing that perhaps we might need to step back and take care of ourselves.
Very good, Eric. Good job, Eric. Good job.
No, you know, what he reminded me was I never even said my name. I'm Mateo Payne, and I'm your trainer today. Thank you for that reminder. You were like, I don't know his name. He didn't say who he was, but it was on the slide. Okay. All right. What else? You don't have to introduce yourself, too. You can just give a comment. Yes.
So at our table, we talked a lot about time and how there's a sense of urgency for every stakeholder in the building. As a teacher, I felt it in the classroom, and whether you're a secondary teacher, your next class is coming in 50 minutes, to stop and take that time and do that collaborative problem solving, take those empathetic steps, really stop and listen. That's hard to give up that time, especially when you're existing in that high pressure, urgency state, and it happens with counselors, social workers, admin. I mean, you're late for a meeting, you've got 3 different fires put out, and the door opens again, and you're like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do with this? I mean, it really is, time is our enemy, and you have to be present. I think Vegas, we're cognizant of where am I right now, what do I have to do, what needs my attention, and take a breath and really invest that time. And I think for our teachers, it's very hard, but I always tell the teachers, if you invest this time in a restorative, if you invest this time, if you give up your academic time to do this restorative or this process, you will get that back. It is an investment. And if you trust that and you take the time and admit when you get it wrong, because we definitely do that a lot, it's time, and that's it's a pressure that all of us deal with in all of our roles.
Perfect comment, because it's time. Our time is up. And so thank you all. That was perfect. That was perfect. It's 11:30. Thank you all. You've been wonderful. And good luck.